Okay, great. Excellent.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a Redgate Database Lifecycle Management webinar. I'm Steve Jones, and I have Arnie from Redgate with me on the line, and we're going to, walk through kind of our vision at Redgate of how we do this DLM process and show you how it works with a few different tools. I think today we're using Jenkins, TFS, and Octopus Deploy to show the flow of all your database changes. I'm going to kind of run the webinar overall, and Arnie's going to do all the demos and kind of explain how this works from the Redgate perspective. A couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, so if you do need to drop out or you want to see something later, we'll have the recording up probably at the end of this week or early next week on our YouTube channel. We also have other videos from previous webinars recorded. So last month, Arnie did a complete Microsoft suite. So we did TFS with TFS build and TFS release management. In the past, I've done them with Git and Subversion as the source control systems, and then using, what did I use? TeamCity, and I think an Octopus Deploy in a couple of them that I've done. So we're doing it on a monthly basis with different platforms, so please feel free to suggest ones you'd like to see or ask us to do some again. There is a questions panel in your little GoToWebinar control panel, so if you have questions, please feel free to post them in there. We will try to answer them today on the webinar. If we run out of time or they're a little more involved, we'll answer those and get those posted later this week on the website so that you can view, kind of what everybody has asked and what we've answered as well. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Arnie, and why don't you, let's explain database lifecycle management to them.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Arnie Eskandari, and I've been with Redgate for just over 5 years. And as a technical sales engineer, I basically work with our customers on daily basis, helping them set up a continuous delivery process for their SQL Server databases using our DLM solution and whatever infrastructure that they want to use on the build and deployment side of things. So here's my contact information, so please feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions or if you're interested in setting up a proof of concept with our tools. We'd be more than happy to help you guys. We obviously have Steve on the call as well. A lot of you already know Steve from Voice of DBA and the SQL Server community. But Steve, do you want to quickly introduce yourself to everyone, just in case there's anyone new to the community here?
So for me, sorry, I was muted there. As I said, I'm Steve Jones, and I've been working with SQL Server since 1991. So I've 25 years in this business with SQL Server, and I've worked in big and small companies, different industries over that time, both as a DBA and as a software developer. And so I've had all these different experiences, and a lot of what Arnie's going to show today is the same type of stuff that I've been doing for 20 years, though I often did a lot of this stuff manually putting it together. So there's nothing new here. What Redgate is trying to do is make it easy and simple and smooth. And so my contact information is up there. Please feel free to get a hold of me if you'd like to. And if you've got other questions, you can post them at SQL Server Central in the forums as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. All right. So we're going to run through a couple of slides to quickly go over the challenges with database change management, and we'll jump right into the demo afterwards. A quick intro to Redgate. So most of you are probably familiar with Redgate and have used our tools to some extent. Actually, at this point, I'd like to run a quick poll to see, how familiar you guys are with Redgate and which tools you've used or are currently using. So yes, Steve, if you wouldn't mind running that poll real quick for us.
All right, so that's up there.
Okay, great. So for those of you who are new to Redgate, we are a software company and have been specializing in SQL Server tools specifically for developers and DBAs for over 16 years now. We are also pretty big on supporting the community, so we have our SQL Server Central and SQL Talk websites where you can find thousands of free articles and training material on SQL Server. We also do sponsor a lot of free community events such as SQL Saturdays and Code Camps.
All right, we've got 60% voted. Come on, let's go. Give me to 75%, people. Give me a few more votes. What tools do you use? I know some of you might not use tools.
Don't be shy.
So yeah, don't be shy. Come on, a couple more people vote. I know you're listening. All right, we're at 70%. I'll go ahead and close that, and we'll keep going, Arnie.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. So let's talk about the challenges with database change management. A lot of dev shops out there are already utilizing best practices around application lifecycle management and rapid delivery of their application code. But the databases are normally left out, and there are still a lot of manual processes involved in delivery of database changes. This is mainly because deployment of databases is not as easy as swapping old code, obviously. There is databases carry state and hold business critical data, which needs to be safely preserved. And because of these unique challenges with database delivery, we've come across a lot of dev shops who've experienced some of these issues in this list to some extent. Obviously, as part of our database delivery process, we need to make sure that we are executing the right changes on our target databases, going all the way to production. We also need to make sure that we have all the changes from all developers put in the right order in order to be executed under the target. So without the right tooling and the right processes, this can become a really cumbersome task for developers and specifically for operation DBAs. Most of you are probably familiar with the principles of application lifecycle management, and DLM here is no different. Our focus is to help build repeatability into your delivery process, where you're continuously testing the production readiness of your changes that you apply to your databases. And deploying small units of changes is really the key principle here. We've talked to a lot of DBAs who are required to review thousands of lines of script when it comes to deploying the databases. And that normally can take multiple days, depending on how many bugs they find in that script. So by committing database changes to source control on a regular basis as a developer, you can introduce automated builds and tests to make sure that all of these small units of changes are tested and validated multiple times before you're ready to deploy from dev to your next environments. And as a result of that, you can your releases can become more reliable and less time-consuming. This statement from DevOps Report is pretty relevant here. So IT shops who utilize best practices around continuous delivery deploy code more frequently and with more confidence. And that enables them to be more agile in their software delivery process and makes the company twice as likely to exceed their profitability. So how can Redgate help? If you look at this diagram, this is basically the development life cycle of databases, going from the development environment on the left side all the way to production on the right side of this diagram here. The middle row is the tools from Redgate that you would be utilizing at each of these stages, and the bottom row is the third-party tools that you might already be using on the application code side, or tools that you are looking into implementing on both the application code and your databases. So obviously, it all starts in the development environment. So putting your changes or your source code into source control is one of the main key principles of continuous integration and continuous delivery. So it all starts from source control, and source control really should be your single source of truth. So here we provide a set of tools that are plugins to SSMS that enable you to check in your changes from within SSMS into your existing source control system, whether that's Git, TFS, SVN, or any other source control system. So we basically follow the state-based approach. And what that really means is that when you make changes to your databases, we update the state of the database in source control as opposed to storing the change scripts that you execute on your development database. So that means we just put create scripts for your database objects in source control, and every time you make a change to an existing object, we go ahead and update the create script for that object in source control. And then when it comes to doing builds and deployments, we rely on the engine of our compare tool, which is the market-leading comparison tool for SQL Server, in order to deploy the changes from the state of the database that is in source control to our target databases. We also have our automation suite, which enables you to achieve continuous integration. So we have a set of build steps as part of SQL CI, which you can see right in the middle there, that enables you to do build on your databases. So we basically, every time you do a build, we create a temporary database off of the database that you have in source control from scratch to make sure that all of your database objects are valid. We pretty regularly we come across shops where they have a lot of a lot of invalid objects on their databases, especially with those who deal with legacy databases a lot. obviously, you don't need to recompile a database every single time in order to do deployments, just like the application code. And as a result of that, you can get away with accumulating a lot of technical debt as a result of all those objects that become invalid with the new changes that you make to your database objects. So this process here, make sure that you don't accumulate that technical debt. So if there's any invalid objects at any point, if there's broken dependencies between objects or things like that, those are caught early in the process as part of your build step. Once the build succeeds, we go ahead and package up your database from source control into a NuGet package. So that's all those create scripts that we put in source control into a NuGet package, which becomes the lockdown version of your database that can be used as a source of deployment going to your higher environments. And then on the deployment side of things, again, we rely on the compare engine to basically generate the update script as a result of a comparison between the NuGet package and the target environments that we are deploying to, and that gives us the update script as well as a visual report that you can review before you even deploy to any of your targets. So we consider that as a gated deployment where someone needs to review the changes before they get executed on your higher environments, such as your pre-production or your production databases.
Right. So,
and once in production, then we also have a couple of, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was going to say, Arnie's described this really well, and the important thing I think to keep in mind is that there's no magic here in what's happening. What we're doing is we're the same stuff that you would do manually, you probably do manually today to move stuff through. We're trying to make it easier and simpler and automated, but it's not different than the stuff you're going to do today. So there's no magic in terms of how to deploy those changes. Those scripts that Arnie's showing, you're mentioning at the various stages, those are the same scripts you might have to generate manually or have to review manually. We're just trying to make it go smoother.
Exactly, yep. And we also have a couple of monitoring tools. So SQL Monitor, which is a performance monitoring tool and alerting tool for your SQL servers. And we also have the DLM Dashboard, which we'll go into in a bit more details later in the demo, which is basically our drift detection tool that you can utilize, and it's free of charge. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start the demo here. So I'm just going to switch screens here real quick. So let me.
All right, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So let me bring up my management studio. Okay, here we go. So we're basically going to go through that workflow that I just described as part of the diagram. So we'll start up in our development environment, make some changes to our development database, get those changes into source control, run an automated build to make sure that the changes are still valid and the database is at a valid state. And once that's done, then we can go into and do deployments. So as Steve mentioned earlier, we'll be using TFS as our source control system, Jenkins as our build system, and Octopus Deploy as our release management tool. So the database that I'll be working with today is this AdventureWorks Jenkins Dev database. I also have a couple of additional databases that represent my higher environments that we'll be deploying to. For the purpose of this demo, I just have everything on a single server just to keep things simple. The first thing you notice here is my database icon is green. This is an indicator of the database being linked to source control through our SQL Source Control plugin. So here in the middle pane, this is our SQL Source Control plugin to Management Studio, which creates the bridge between your databases in SQL Server and your existing source control system. So the process of linking to source control is actually pretty straightforward. So if I pick a database that is not linked to source control, and if you go to the Setup tab, here you can see you have options to link to a source control system. You hit Next. We have out-of-box support for Git version TFS, but I'm actually curious to know what source control system you guys are currently using on the application code or looking to use for your databases. So we're just going to do a quick poll to see what source control systems you guys are familiar with or are currently using.
Yep. So we've got the poll up there now. Subversion, TFS, Git, Mercurial. There's Perforce, there's Vault, there's CVS, there's not Cruise Control. There's a bunch I've used over the years. SourceSafe. Yeah. Please don't use SourceSafe. If you're using SourceSafe, Git and Mercurial and SVN are free. If you're a small team, Microsoft will give you TFS for free if you're less than 5 people. So please, use one of these systems. They're really important. All right, I've got most people voting, Arnie, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that down. You can keep going.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Steve. So yeah, so you basically select your source control system, you hit next, and then provide the server URL if you're using TFS and the specific folder that you want your database changes to go into. But in my case, my database is already linked. So I'll just quickly show you the folder structure that I have in source control for my database. So when you link your database to source control goes ahead and creates these subfolders for each class of object, and then within each of these folders we store the create scripts for the corresponding object. So here are my store procedures that I have on my database, all in source control. So if I click on my database, if you go to commit changes, you should see that there's currently nothing to commit. So this is telling me that my database is at the same state as what's in source control. And before I go into make changes, I'd just like to quickly point out the DLM dashboard here. This is actually the free tool that I mentioned earlier, and it's basically a tool to help you detect drift on any of your environments. So there are two types of changes that DLM dashboard can detect. One is called an update. So here you can see the updates from my previous releases to my environment. So and then it can also detect drifts. So drift is a change that is made directly to any of your databases in any environment that DLM dashboard had never seen before. So, or to be more precise, the state of the database that it had never seen before. So it would show those as drifts. So here I'm currently monitoring my integration testing and acceptance in production databases. The reason why I don't have development up here is because development constantly changes. So it's always in a drift state. So, but I care more about the higher environments, make sure that we don't make any direct changes to those environments, at any point. And even if we do, then this will catch those and it can send you email notifications when there is a drift.
Hey, Arnie.
So here you can go ahead.
Somebody was just asking, are we doing data drift, data deltas, or just schema deltas in here?
It's just schema, yeah.
Yep. There you go. Go ahead and show them.
Currently only does schema and no data drifts. But really good question. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and acknowledge these changes from previous releases. That way you can see how we can see updates again once we do the release. So there's a nice integration between our build process and DLM dashboard. So every time you do a build, you can get the build process to send an update state to the DLM dashboard. So when you deploy to higher environments through the automated process, it will know that these changes actually came from the automated process, and instead of drift, it will show those as updates. Okay, so now I'm ready to go ahead and start making a couple of changes here. So I'm going to make a change to one of my existing objects here. So let's modify the store procedure. Select start from, bad practice. I'm going to replace it with a couple of column names. So using SQL prompt makes that really easy. Let's do this and make sure it's nicely formatted. Again, using prompts. Go ahead and apply my change. I'm also going to go ahead and make a data change to one of my lookup tables. So another great benefit from using SQL Source Control is that you can also source control the data changes that you make to your reference tables or lookup tables. So to do that, you can just simply go to your database, go to other SQL Source Control tasks, and link or unlink static data. So this will give you a list of tables that you have on your database, and from there you can select the ones that are considered as lookup tables. So that means these are tables where you make most of the data changes in your development environment, and you push the same data all the way to your production environment. So here you can see I have two tables that I'm source controlling in terms of data, so contact type and address type. The schema of all tables is source controlled by default, but the data you need to go in and select, so that way you don't end up source controlling data in your transactional tables that you don't push to higher environments. So here in the Object Explorer, you notice that we have these blue blobs now. This is telling you that there are changes on the database that need to be committed to source control. But before I commit this change, I'm also going to go ahead and make a data change real quick. So I'm just going to add a new record to one of those lookup tables. So I'm going to call this DLM webinar contacts. Okay, perfect. So went ahead and made a couple of changes. Now I'm ready to commit those changes to source control. So I'm going to go ahead, right-click on my database, commit changes to source control. And here it should show us the changes that we made. So here on the left side, you can see who made the change. Currently, we can only show you the user who made the schema change, but the data changes are shown as unknown. So if you click on any of these changes here at the bottom, you can see what's different between the development database on the left side and your the version of that object in source control on the right side. So here's the store procedure. Again, we store create scripts in source control, so you can see although I altered an existing object, we're updating the definition of the object in source control. And data, we store them as insert scripts. So you can see all the records are identical, except that new one that we just added for the DLM webinar contacts. So from here, I can go in and write my check-in comment like you normally do when checking in code into source control. So I'm going to just write a short comment here.
So make it a good comment. You know, all you people out there that are new to version control are not sure, this comment is something that you're going to want to look at in 6 months and try to understand what you did. So I know Arnie's in a hurry here, so he's not doing a lot, but when you write that comment, think about what will this mean to you in 6 months when you have to go back and look at this and try to figure out what happened. That's what you want to put in the comment.
Exactly, yeah, really good point. So I'm going to go ahead and commit. And on that note, Steve, you can also see the history of your changes that you make to your database from within Management Studio. So if I go to view history here, this will show me the history of all the change sets that I've made to TFS as a result of the check-ins that I've done from my database. So this is where those comments can be really, really helpful. So you can basically take a look at a commit, and if the comments are pretty detailed, then you can easily tell what change was made and why as part of this change set. So all this information is pulled from TFS, so we're not storing anything on your database or anywhere else to keep track of these changes. This is all pulled from your source control system. So you can easily go back in history and see what commits were made by which developer, when and why. You can see what objects were affected and how they were changed going from the previous change set to the current change set or revision that you're looking at. And there's also a nice integration with our compare tools here. So if you want to compare, let's say, 2 different change sets from source control and see what objects were changed or what data was changed, you can use our compare tools to do that. You can also use the same tools to do rollback. So if you want to roll back your, let's say, your development database to an older change set, you can just simply pick the change set and then launch SQL compare to the rollback from there as well. Okay, and so I committed my change, so that actually triggered an automated build in Jenkins. But before we look into the build, I'm just going to quickly point out to this object locking feature as well. So a lot of you might be working in a shared model where multiple developers are making changes to the same object or the same development database. So object locking can become really useful at that point where you can go in and lock your objects before you can make changes to it. So I can go in here and say, lock this object. It will put this lock icon next to the object, so whoever is using SQL Source Control, you can see exactly what objects are locked. And when they go into this object locking tab, they can see exactly which developer locked the object when. And everyone has the option to unlock objects regardless of who locked it. But it's a nice communication tool, so if there's an object locked, you can go to the person who locked it and make sure they're no longer working with it before you make changes to it. So yeah, now I'd like to transition to the build process. Steve, was there anything else that you wanted to add on the source controlling side of things before we look at builds?
No, not really. I mean, I think, the object locking is one of those things, like Arnie said, it's a great communication tool. We've had a lot of people that they use it for that reason, so that, if you have to make a change to an object and then you realize, oh, I've also got to change some other object, you can see that maybe it's locked because somebody else is working on it. It's a great way to create discussion. And then the view history is another way to do that. We have plenty of customers that work in a Scrum or an Agile or some sort of process where they have meetings on a regular basis, and going through that view history is a great way to just recap what's been happening in development across the last, day, week, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, great. So yeah, so here's Jenkins. So we have a build configured for our database here. You can always, configure a build for both the application code and the database as part of a single build if that's what you prefer. But here you can see our build actually succeeded a couple of minutes ago here. So I can go into the console output, and we can see exactly what we've done here. Actually, before showing the output, I think it would be better for me to show you the configuration so you can see exactly what our build steps look like, and how they're configured in your CI environment. In the meantime, I think let's do a quick poll to see what build system you guys are currently using or are looking to use, either on the application code side or the database. And so we can make sure that we're keeping this as relevant as possible. I've also come across a lot of people who use their build system like Jenkins for doing build and deployment, and that's actually a pretty common process. I don't know if you've seen that a lot, Steve, too, but
I do. Jenkins and Bamboo. We don't have Bamboo up there. We should have Bamboo. We should have none as well. But Jenkins and Bamboo seem to be the ones that people will use to do both sides as well. You could use all of these. Right. You certainly could use TeamCity. People do that as well to, do their deployments to test or production or anywhere else. But
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, Jenkins has gotten real popular because it's, it's free and it's been out there a long time. People have been using it on the software side for a long time across all platforms, right? Java, .NET, Python, whatever. So.
Exactly, yeah. And because it's open source, people have actually created a lot of different plugins for different purposes.
Right.
So yeah, it's
yeah.
One of the most
I think it's kind of cumbersome myself. Like when I work with Jenkins, it feels like something I hacked together, and I'm
exactly,
not, I'm not the greatest UI person out there, so it feels like a bit of a hack. I much prefer the VSTS build system that they put online. I think is fantastic, and I like TeamCity as well.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
I really love that latest version. Yeah.
We need to do that, the online one here at some point. So maybe that'll be next month or something. All right, we got about 70%, so I'm going to close this and let you move on to the next. Show us the Jenkins.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. So here are the steps that I've configured in Jenkins. So I've mainly used Windows batch commands. So we, as part of our automation tools, we offer the SQL CI executable, which gets installed as part of our DLM solution. And as part of SQL CI, we offer 4 different steps that you could use. So the first one, and the mandatory one, is called build. So this is the step that creates your database from scratch on a temporary database. So it runs a comparison between what's in source control, so all the files that get checked out from source control, against the temporary database, tries to build a database from scratch to make sure that all the objects on your database are valid and that there is no syntax or compilation errors. Once the build is successful, then we go ahead and create a NuGet package, by the name and the version number for the NuGet package, and it goes ahead and builds the package for you. My next step is the test step from SQL CI. So the test step uses a couple of testing frameworks that are open source. One is called SQL Comp, and the other one is called TSQL-T. So SQL Comp, they're all basically just stored procedures. SQL Comp is a coding standard testing framework. It also offers a couple of performance tests as well. So here are my SQL Comp tests on my database. So you can see, there's a test to check for fragmented indexes for performance testing. There's also a couple of coding standard tests to make sure that, I'm following best practices as far as my database objects and everything else. The good thing is that these are all stored procedures, so you can simply go in and modify them and, customize them to your own needs. And the other framework that I mentioned, TSQL-T, is a unit testing framework. So TSQL-T provides you with all these framework objects here. that you can use to create unit tests for your databases. So for instance, I could use this fake table to create a fake table of an existing object, an existing table, maybe populate that table with some test data and run a stored procedure that runs on that table to make sure that it does the right calculation on data or the right data retrieval and so on and so forth. So T-SQL, there's a bit of learning curve to it because you need to know exactly what each of these objects do and how you can use them to create unit tests. But the good news is they on their website they actually have a lot of useful guides and documentation on how to get started with T-SQL. But SQL Cop provides you with all those tests out of box. You don't even need to write scripts if you don't want to. You can just stick to the default and get up and running with those tests. And if you do have those tests on your development database and you put them in source control, then our SQL CI test step will detect those tests and it will run them automatically as part of your build process. And that's what I'm doing here for my database. And finally, because we are using Octopus Deploy, and Octopus Deploy has its own built-in NuGet repository, I'm using this publish step to send the NuGet package from my working directory in Jenkins to the NuGet repository used by Octopus Deploy. So publish doesn't do any deployment. It's simply just sending the NuGet package to a different package repository that can be used for deployments later. But I'm also deploying to one of my environments automatically. So Octopus Deploy provides you with a command line as well. So here I'm using the octo.exe to create a release on an existing project that I have for my database. And I'm deploying it to my latest environment, which is the integration environment or the integration database. So this database basically represents my database from the most recent successful build. So this is something that obviously you guys need to make a decision on, as far as how far you want to go in terms of automating your deployments. Some people, want to go all the way to production with the right test and review steps in place. But some people, want to be on the conservative side and deploy to, let's say, testing automatically. But when it comes to deploying to the other environments, they want to sort of trigger those manually using the release management tool. So, our build succeeded. So if I go to my console output, basically here's the report. So we're using the engine of our SQL compare tool in the background to do all of this stuff. So here's the comparison report against that temporary database. So you can see we're building all of our objects from source control against that temporary database. There are also filters that you could use to filter out specific things that you don't want to build or deploy, such as users that could be different from one environment to another, and things like that. We also build the data into your NuGet package, so any data that you are source controlling in terms of your lookup tables, you can see those as part of your NuGet package as well. So when it comes to the deployment, we can actually deploy both your schema and the data together as part of the same release pipeline. So here we created our NuGet package, and we went ahead and ran the tests on the database as part of this next step. So, and that was successful. And then later we went ahead and created, published a NuGet package to Octopus Deploy, and we created the release using Octopus Deploy here, and we deployed to our integration database. So if I go to my Octopus Deploy dashboard, this is the project we're working with at VentureWorks Jenkins, and you can see my latest environment is currently at version 105, and the other ones are one version behind because I just automatically deploy to my integration environment. So, so earlier on we were talking about people using their build system to also do deployments. That's totally fine, but the release management tools offer a couple of additional benefits that are actually really can be really useful for your deployment processes. So, for example, here I have a nice dashboard of what releases I've pushed to which environment, which projects, which one succeeded, which one failed, and when. And if you go into each release, you can actually see the artifacts of what was deployed as part of either the application code or the database. So it gives you a nice audit trail of the history of your deployment and the content of those deployments. So here my deployment was successful to the integration database. So I'm going to go ahead and promote this to my testing environment. So this is how you would do it manually. How you would do this manually. So I can go ahead and say go to testing, and deploy now. So here we're using the PowerShell command list that come as part of our SQL release module that is offered as part of DLM Automation suite. So if I go to my processes, we actually provide a step template for Octopus Deploy, so you don't have to work with PowerShell if you don't want to. But if there's anything you want to customize as far as these steps, you can go in and modify the PowerShell scripts that are sitting behind these step templates. So this is what my deployment basically process looks like. So the first thing we do is we extract the content of the NuGet package. For my latest and my testing environment, I do a non-gated deployment, which means that there is no review step. It's simply running a comparison between the NuGet package and those databases, and it updates those databases as part of the same step. Whereas for my staging and production, I do things slightly differently. So, for instance, for my staging environment, I'm doing a database-to-database comparison between staging and production to make sure that my staging database matches production before I deploy to it. And then once that's confirmed, then I can go ahead and create a database release, which is basically creating the update script as a result of the comparison from the NuGet package to my staging database, and also a visual report of what is being deployed and if there's any warning associated with that deployment. So again, we're using SQL Compare here in the background. So once that step is complete, then we have a manual intervention step for staging and production to review the deployment before we finally execute those changes on the target databases. So although this is automated, but you can see how easy it is to actually introduce review steps and manual review steps to make sure that you are deploying the right thing all the way to production. So if I go to my dashboard, you can see we successfully deployed to our testing environment. So now I'm going to go ahead and promote to staging, where we get the chance to manually review the deployment before it gets executed on that database. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy to staging. In the meantime, I'm just going to go back to my...
Hey, Arnie, actually, while that runs, let me run this poll.
Yeah, go for it.
So we're wondering if you use any release management tools out there. If you're like me, for most of my career, most of you probably just do this by hand. You decide which scripts to run. But there's a number of tools here that we plug into, and there's certainly other ones that are available out there. IBM has a tool. There's a few others that are not widely used, but they are available. So let us know what you do, and just curious how many people. It seems like most people that are responding use Octopus, followed by Visual Studio, which makes sense. I think those are the two most popular systems that on the Microsoft stack of things. Arnie, while we're doing this poll, somebody asked, does this integrate with AWS Code Deploy? Have you ever looked at that? I haven't looked at it.
Yeah, me neither. Typically, one question that I ask is, does it support PowerShell? Like, if you can use PowerShell to create steps as part of that deployment tool, then you could use our PowerShell modules, the SQL release modules, to define your deployment steps. So yeah, but I personally haven't used AWS Code Deploy, so I can't 100% tell you if we do support it.
Okay, I'm going to make a note. We'll follow up with that and see what it is. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and you can go back and show people what's going on with the database close.
Sounds good. Thank you, Steve.
So
yeah, so here you can see our deployment stopped. It's waiting to be reviewed. Under artifacts here, we've generated a set of files, and we have this changes.html file. If I open this file, this should tell us exactly what is being deployed to staging. So again, we haven't deployed anything yet. This is purely just a report of the differences that exist between the NuGet package and the target database, our staging database. So here's what that report looks like. So it shows you what objects are affected or data and how. So here we're replacing select star with select first name, last name, middle name. Again, this is not the deployment script. This is just showing you how the object definition is being modified. And here's the changes for data. So you can see exactly what data differences exist between your NuGet package and your target database. There's 3 categories for changes. So there's new objects that are shown in green, that are objects that are being dropped, which are shown in red, and there are objects that are being modified that are shown in orange. And then we also have the warnings tab. So this is warnings on changes that might result into data loss, such as a table being rebuilt or tables being dropped and things like that. You would see warnings here as part of the compare engine. And finally, the deployment script. So here's the alter for the store procedure, and here's the insert for that new record that we just added. So everything is encapsulated into a transaction. So for any reason your deployment fails at any point while executing the script, it can roll back the transaction so that way it doesn't leave your target database in an inconsistent state. So once you've reviewed this, the deployment artifact, then you can go in and either approve the deployment or reject the deployment. So, and Octopus Deploy can send email notifications to the right people depending on what action you take here as part of the review process. So go ahead and proceed, and this is going to go ahead now, take that update script that we just reviewed and execute it on our staging. And it's the exact same process going into our production. So there is another review step that we need to go through before we deploy to the production database. Okay, so you can see my deployment to staging succeeded. I can quickly verify that if I look at my staging database. If you look at our store procedure, you can see there's a new updated store procedure. And if you look at our tables, look at contact type, here's the new contact that we just added. So yeah, so it will be the same process going into production. So I can just go ahead and say promote to production and deploy now, and it's going to go through the same steps. So this is basically at the high level the workflow of basically utilizing this continuous integration and continuous delivery process for your databases. Again, you could have the same, you could integrate your databases into the same projects that you might have for your application and just introduce those steps for doing the databases built on your databases or the deployments, or you could keep them separate depending on how frequently you push releases on either the application code side or your database side. So it looks like there are a lot of questions, so I said let's go ahead and jump in and see
okay.
and answer them all.
So there's, for sure, somebody just asked about migration scripts with our NuGet package, and we moved this thing through. So
yeah, really good question. So yeah, so that's actually one thing that I forgot to mention as part of SQL Source Control. So in SQL Source Control, we have this feature called migrations, which is basically used to override the default behavior of the compare engine. So for instance, if there are schema changes that SQL Compare may not be able to handle properly, like for instance, let's say we want to add a not column to an existing table with existing data, and we want to provide some default value for that column for the existing records. Obviously, if you try to do that through SQL Compare, it will not see the data portion of it. It will just try to deploy the schema part of it, and the deployment will fail. So what you can do is to write a migration script, which includes both the schema change and the data change as a single script, and you can associate that change to the object that you've modified. So when you go to commit changes, it tells you what objects are now need to be checked in, and you can go into migrations and say, for this object, I want you to run this migration script, and I don't want you to create your own script for this object. So then SQL Compare says that there's a migration script for that object and executes that migration script as part of the larger deployment script. And the migration scripts are checked into source control. So we are actually currently working on the latest version, which is in beta, but it is scheduled for release towards the end of May. And that migration version of migration actually works pretty nicely with the whole automated process and also with distributed source control systems such as Git. So we basically stored your migration scripts as in a table on your database. And you can commit those migration scripts into source control, and SQL Compare will see those in your NuGet package, and we'll run them depending on what version your target database is at.
Yeah, so somebody just asked, is it going to be a new SOC 5? So Source Control 5 is going to release soon. right? And,
exactly, yeah. So it's currently in beta, but
right.
yeah.
Yeah, so all the products are being synced up. So SQL Compare, SQL Source Control, and the SQL Release are kind of all in this sync process to make sure that any changes you make in development get flowed through automatically. So,
Exactly, yeah.
Arnie, somebody asked about variables in Octopus. Can you show the Octopus and all the variables that we've configured in there?
Oh, yes, totally. So I'm going to go to my, so the purpose of variables in Octopus is to enable you to use the same steps for different environments. So instead of me, if you look at my process, instead of me having to create the same step multiple times for different environments, I'm just using the same step, but instead I'm using variables to define which database or which server or whatever is different going from one environment to another. So for instance, if I look at my create database release step here, here you can see I'm using variables for my target SQL Server instance or the database name. You could do the same for your username, passwords, and things like that. And depending on which environment you are deploying to, Octopus Deploy will go ahead and run the read those variables from this variables tab here and plug them into your deployment step. So when I'm deploying to my staging environment, you can see here in scope, I have staging. So it will plug this database name into this step, and it will deploy to this database. When I deploy to production, it will use this database name instead. So this enables you to use the same deployment step for multiple environments or multiple machines or multiple databases at the same time.
Yeah, so we don't have a ton of variables there. You can see, kind of we're just reusing some different ones for the differences between environments there, right? So it's really just
exactly.
five variables there overall that we're using. What else? Yeah. So somebody asked in terms of the deployment, what happens to the existing transactional data when we deploy from the package?
So the transactional data doesn't, we don't really touch the transactional data. So as I said, we mainly package up the schema of your database in source control or in NuGet package, and any lookup data that you store in NuGet package. But we don't really touch any of your transactional data as part of the deployment process.
Yeah. So
there are some changes.
Yeah, I mean, we do run the alter, right? Like normal alter that's out there.
We do, yes.
Yeah. So the same way that you made that change in development, right? You didn't drop the table and then recreate it with a new column. You just said alter it, add a new column. With your defaults or whatever. That's the same thing that we run, and we'll get run when we deploy that from the NuGet package.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, sorry, I got distracted for a second. I was reading something. Let's see. Oh, so here's a good one. Somebody asked about when we commit from version control, do we select or create a branch when we're trying to make a commit, and maybe that's worth a couple minutes just discussing how that works from the other side. We're in development. So I know you showed we're linked to a branch, really.
Yeah, that's really a good question. So I actually have an example with a couple of other databases here. So basically when you link your database to source control as a developer, we keep track of what folder you're linked to under your user profile, on the machine. So when each developer can basically, when they go into Management Studio, they can link their databases to whatever branch that they're working on. Typically, we recommend having a dedicated database per branch because that works, flawlessly and nicely when you're dealing with branches. So for instance, here with this version of AdventureWorks, you can see I have a couple of branch databases called Feature A, Feature B, and then I have the main database here. So there are branches I've set up branches in TFS that represent each of those features or projects. But when it comes to merging, you would actually be just using the normal merge functionality that comes in TFS. So we don't really offer any merging capability here, so you can just go into your branches in TFS or Visual Studio and do the merges up to the trunk or your main folder whatever that is.
Right. And so, typically if you're going to do multiple branches and you have to work with them, we really recommend, like Arnie showed, you have those multiple databases there, because if you're adding and removing columns as you go from branch to branch, which is entirely possible, then really quickly you are affecting data, and that's very problematic. And if you play with it a little bit, I think you'll realize quickly that you get yourself in a lot of trouble in terms of how do I manage this data if columns will appear and disappear. So, for programmable objects, right, for stored procedures, functions, views, defaults, rules, those types of things, doesn't really matter if you're switching branches, but for data it does. So in general, I think you want to have a database that's linked to a branch so that you have a kind of a consistent view of what that branch of code looks like. And then in the merging side, I think you would really merge these on the source control side. So you would merge these in, whatever your git merge process is, or your subversion tools, or your TFS tools to do the merge on that side.
Exactly, yeah. And when it comes to updating your database, you can actually use this get latest feature. So once you do the merge in source control and your source control folder gets updated, you can go to get latest, and then this will see what new changes have been merged into that folder,
right?
And you can just hit get latest and update the corresponding database that is linked to that branch.
And I recommend that. I mean, certainly, in this case, Arnie could write a script from feature A branch, and then he could just in the upper drop down change the feature B branch and rerun the same script. But I don't really recommend you do that, because you're going to forget things, you're going to get confused. You're better off doing the merging from the version control side.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, I'm trying to think what else I see here. So somebody asked about static controlling data, but with a where clause with a filter of some sort, so only some of the data is controlled. We don't do that right now, but there is a user voice item that you can vote on, and I'd encourage you to vote on that, because I think that's a valuable change that could be made to managing that data.
You can achieve that currently with the command line of data compare, where you can go in and use where clauses, but not through SQL Source Control. So with SQL Source Control, it's either all data or none. But yeah, as Steve said, there is a user voice for it that you can vote for. And
all right, somebody says, this is a good one, Arnie. Somebody asked about how we might integrate data changes that change between environments. So if you've got, I'm assuming, a table that has some configuration items, like maybe a path or a name or a value, and that changes between development and production. Have you recommended some things there for people?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no easy way to that, unless you, Steve, know of a good way to keep track of those. Because they're different going from one environment to another, that means if you want to have source control as your single source of truth, then you would need to have each of those environments in source control, or just the data side of it in source control in their corresponding branches. And
yeah, I mean, you could do that. So you certainly could have a release branch or multiple branches that said, here is just some static data, and then you would, in essence, be managing that as a separate software pipeline. The other way I've seen some people do it is that in their release process, I've typically seen this manually, but you could certainly do it in Octopus. You could have a path or a script as a variable, and what you would do is you would need a step in your deployment process that pulls that in and executes that against the appropriate environment. So Arnie, if you go back to Octopus Deploy and you show the variables there for database name, we've got multiple databases there.
Sure.
So you could have one that said, config table development, config table prod, config table staging, whatever. And what you'd put is there some value that you would have a script that reads that in and says, okay, make this deploy. The problem with that is you're kind of putting some software code in your deployment process, and it's a little bit hidden. So I don't really recommend that, but I've seen people do that where they're doing kind of injection in the deployment process. And you can certainly do this. People do it all the time with web.configs and ASP.NET sites.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, VS makes that a little bit easier to do some injection at deployment time, but you're then really being tightly coupled to a particular deployment process, and you just have to be aware for emergency changes or things like that, that you've kind of got this thing that's outside of your, you're the rest of your development process, right? This is really now you're making the operational people deal with deployment of code, in essence.
Yeah, yeah.
So, there's no good answer there. I mean, I think if you've got an idea or you have something, please send it to us at Redgate or post a user voice item, because I think that that's a valid concern. I don't know how big a case it is. It's probably more of an issue with the BI side, SSIS, SSRS stuff, where you're really changing things.
It is, yeah.
It certainly could be an issue here as well. So.
Yeah. I've heard that the same issue on the schema side of things, where you have client databases that might have some different objects, like custom objects specific to that client, and people always wonder, like, how do you keep track of those changes that are specific to clients, and you have hundreds of client databases.
Right, right.
So
those are cases for sure, right? And that's something we're working on as well. So it's about time. I'm going to do one last question, Arnie, and then I think we'll call it. So somebody's asking, if you're constantly restoring production to development, right, to refresh development, are you going to have conflicts in version control and SQL Source Control?
So yes, you will. But that's pretty easy to handle. So when you restore your development database from production, as long as the database name stays the same, that doesn't break the linkage of your database to your source control folder. So when I restore, let's say, my development database to a version from production, when I go to Commit Changes tab in SQL Source Control, that will show me what conflicts there are between the development database that is now restored and the latest version in source control. And then from there, you can pick and choose which one of those conflicts you want to, you want to take from your development database, and which ones you want to stick to from the server side or the source control side. And then you can easily resolve those conflicts from within the tool itself. But yeah, that's basically about it. You don't really need to relink your database to source control or do any additional steps in order to restore your database from production.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably should do a webinar on conflicts and showing that at some point. But in essence, true, right? Ideally, your development database kind of looks like your production database overall, other than the changes you made in development. And so if you have to do that, you should be able to pull back all the changes from version control and say, now let's reapply current development on top of production, and you just accept everything coming from version control there. So that would work. Yeah. The other thing is, Arnie showed the DLM dashboard. Ideally, if you have to make changes to production that aren't in development, you catch them with the DLM dashboard, and then you take that script and apply it back to development right away and commit that to source control. That way, hopefully, you keep things in sync fairly well as well, so that production never has anything that isn't in development. Development might have more, but version control allows you to reapply that very quickly. So.
Exactly.
All right. I think we're going to run. Everybody, thank you very much for attending. As I mentioned, this is recorded, and we'll have it up by the end of the week or maybe early next week, and we'll post the Q&A as well, so if you want to do that. Please let us know if there's things we didn't answer, or that you have other questions, or you'd like to see some other products, some other platforms, some other integrations in the future. As I said, we try to do these every month, so please let other people know if they're interested and they'd like to pass it along. Arnie's information is up there if you need to contact him, or if you need more information on DLM, please feel free to send us a note. And thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.